In the gleaming towers of Manhattan's financial district, a seasoned deal architect was about to face the ultimate corporate betrayal. What started as a routine final authorization meeting took a shocking turn when they came face to face with an identical stranger claiming their life's work. Maya Torres wasn't your typical corporate strategist. For 18 months, she had spent her life architecting the most complex acquisition in her company's history, known for building unbreachable compliance systems that protected billion-dollar deals. When she encountered Julian Knox's twin brother Caleb stepping into her role, she had no idea they were walking into a technological trap of their own making. Maya had designed biometric security protocols that would lead to the complete collapse of a $1.8 billion acquisition. What began as a strategic leadership transition would become a masterclass in how expertise cannot be inherited through DNA. The financial world would never be the same after watching competence triumph over connections in the most public corporate meltdown of the year. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The cursor blinked on the final compliance screen I had. Just opened the secure gateway to transmit the last layer of regulatory confirmation for the $1.8 billion Marlin acquisition, a deal that took 18 months, 4 international compliance reviews, and 7 sleepless nights to architect. Then the door opened. Julian Knox. The CEO himself walked in without knocking. He wasn't alone. Behind him was a man who looked exactly like him. Same sharp jawline, same calculating eyes, same tailored navy suit. But something was off about the way he carried himself, like he was wearing Julian's confidence instead of owning it. "Maya," Julian said too. Casually, "This won't take long." I straightened up in my chair, the secure window still open behind me, waiting for my biometric confirmation to finalize the largest deal in our company's history. "What is it, Julian? The Marlin team expects final sign-off by 3. He gave a strange smile. One I'd never seen in 8 years of working together. "We're implementing a strategic leadership transition effective immediately." I blinked, confused. Strategic transition for what the deal closes in 48 hours. "You've done exceptional work," he interrupted, motioning toward the man behind him. "But we need fresh optics for the final stage. This is Caleb, my brother. He'll be spearheading the close." His brother. I turned my head slowly toward the carbon copy of Julian, who stepped forward with a confident smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Maya, right." Caleb extended his hand like we were meeting at a networking event. "I've heard incredible things about your work on the Marlin integration." I didn't move. The secure window was still blinking patiently on my monitor next to the line that read, "Senior Architect Voice Verification Required," a system I had designed specifically to prevent unauthorized access during critical deal phases. "Julian, what exactly are you saying?" "Caleb brings a fresh perspective," Julian continued as if I hadn't spoken. "Venture capital background, crypto platform experience. He's perfectly positioned to represent the Knox legacy in this transition." Crypto platform experience. I had spent the last month explaining to Marlin's legal team why our compliance architecture was bulletproof, why our regulatory framework could withstand international scrutiny. And now Julian wanted to hand the reins to someone whose background was in an industry known for regulatory chaos. Julian, the Marlin team specifically requested continuity assurance. They've been working with me for over a year. They know my systems. "Systems can be transferred," Caleb said smoothly. "Documentation exists, protocols can be explained. What matters is leadership vision. Systems can be transferred." I almost laughed. The gateway protocol alone required 3 separate biometric confirmations synchronized with Marlin's legal team, a process that took me 6 months to perfect with their chief compliance officer, Liam Rosario. But Caleb didn't know, that Julian didn't know, that nobody knew that except me and Sophie Nguyen, who had signed off on the architecture before her strategic resignation last spring. "Maya," Julian's voice carried a finality that made my stomach drop. "Security will help transition your materials. Your access will be transferred to Caleb by tomorrow morning. My mouth opened, but no sound came out. 18 months. I had given to this deal from the initial feasibility study to the regulatory maze to the final compliance framework I had built, relationships with Marlin's entire legal team, had dinner with their CTO in Geneva, had spent Christmas Eve on a conference call with their board, and now I was being replaced 48 hours before close by Julian's brother, who thought systems could be explained like PowerPoint slides. As I stood up, my chair still warm from hours of work, I glanced once more at the screen. The cursor still blinked next to the verification line waiting for me. The system wouldn't respond to anyone else. Julian didn't know that. Caleb certainly didn't know that, not yet. Congratulations, Caleb, I said, finally, my voice steadier. Then I felt, I hope you understand what you're walking into. His grip was firm when he shook my hand, but I caught something in his eyes. A flicker of uncertainty quickly masked, I'm looking forward to the challenge. I logged out of my workstation, without closing the gateway system, then picked up my blazer and walked toward the door. The Marlin documentation is in the shared drive, I said over my shoulder. Though I should mention the final protocols require specific authorization sequences. We'll figure it out, Julian said dismissively. That's what documentation is for. I paused at the door and looked back at Caleb, who was already settling into my chair, examining the multiple monitors with barely concealed confusion. Caleb, quick. Question: what's Marlin's primary regulatory concern with cross-border data transfers? He blinked once. Data sovereignty, obviously. Obviously, I repeated. Data sovereignty was textbook corporate speak. Marlin's actual concern was algorithmic transparency. In procurement automation, a detail that had taken 3 months of negotiations to resolve. Good luck. The cursor kept blinking behind me, waiting. I hadn't expected a parade, but I thought maybe someone would acknowledge what was happening. Maybe HR would send a transition email. Maybe my assistant Elena would ask about handover procedures. But as I walked through the open floor plan toward my office, the silence was deafening. No one made eye contact. Most of the junior staff suddenly found their screens fascinating the same people who had come to me with questions about compliance architecture, who had asked for my input on client strategy, who had celebrated when I closed the Marlin preliminary agreement. Now couldn't lift their heads. My office overlooked Manhattan's financial district through floor-to-ceiling windows that had cost more than most people's cars. Julian had insisted on the premium lease for client impressions, but right now, the view felt like a prison bars of glass, separating me from a world that suddenly seemed very far away. I opened my desk drawer, the one that held my fountain pen collection, emergency ibuprofen, and a framed photo from our first Marlin site visit in Switzerland. Maya Torres and Liam Rosario standing in front of Marlin's Zurich headquarters, both of us grinning like we'd just solved world hunger. We had no idea then that the real challenge wouldn't be regulatory compliance, but corporate politics. A cardboard box was already sitting by my desk. Someone had anticipated this conversation before I'd even had it. Efficient, ruthless, no label, no explanation, just a brown box waiting to swallow 8 years of my professional life. I moved through the motions, pulling files, certificates. A small, succulent plant Elena had given me last year for my birthday when I reached for my nameplate from the glass door. I realized it was already gone. Olivia Torres, Senior Deal Architect. The brass plate that had taken me 6 years to earn was nowhere to be found in its place. A temporary paper sign read, Caleb Knox, Strategic Transition Lead. Strategic Transition Lead. They couldn't even give him a real title. Just corporate speak that meant nothing to anyone. I sat down one last time, in my chair, and stared at the blank monitors, then pulled out my phone and opened the secure admin app I'd built for system oversight. The gateway protocol was still running, still waiting for final authorization from a senior architect who was no longer senior or apparently an architect, but the system didn't know that yet. I scrolled through the back-end logs. Caleb had already tried accessing the main compliance dashboard twice. Both attempts had been rejected for insufficient credentials. The error messages were intentionally vague security feature I'd insisted on after a near-breach attempt last spring. Only 3 people had full gateway access. Me, Sophie, who had resigned, and Liam Rosario on Marlin's side, who wouldn't authorize. Final release without synchronized confirmation from Julian Knox's architect, as I deleted my personal files from the server. Leaving only the professional work that belonged to the company, I kept one small program intact, a silent script buried. Deep in the compliance architecture, it looked like standard verification code. Harmless, forgettable. But it housed the biometric encryption needed to trigger final payment authorization from Marlin's escrow account. It couldn't be accessed remotely, couldn't be overridden, and couldn't be bypassed without a complete system rebuild. Only one person could activate it properly. Me? My phone buzzed a text from Alina, my former mentee who now worked in systems analysis. Maya. What's happening, Caleb? Just asked me to explain your gateway documentation, but half the files are encrypted. I typed back quickly. The encryption keys are biometric-linked standard security protocol. He seems frustrated, she replied. Wants to know if there's a manual. Override. There isn't, I responded. That's why it's secure. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally. Maya, this doesn't feel right. I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed, Trust the system, Alina. It knows what it's doing. As I sealed the cardboard box, shut my phone, pinged with an email from Julian's assistant subject line, Congratulations to Caleb Knox. It was a company-wide announcement celebrating Caleb's new role as strategic transition lead, praising his vision and leadership in guiding the Marlin acquisition. To completion, they'd sent it to my personal email by mistake. For a brief moment, I imagined responding something short, something that would explain exactly what they'd just done, but I closed the email instead. What would I say that I'd built the system? They were now locked out of that. The man they were celebrating couldn't spell Marlin correctly, that they'd just handed their biggest deal to someone who thought data sovereignty was the primary concern in international tech acquisitions. I picked up the box and walked toward the elevator, each step echoing in the sudden quiet of the office. No one stopped me. No one said goodbye. The elevator doors closed on a floor full of people who had already forgotten I existed. But the system remembered. The system was still waiting, still blinking patiently for Maya Torres, senior deal architect, to complete what she'd started. Let them celebrate Caleb. They had no idea what they'd just locked themselves out of 6 months ago. Sophie and Nguyen and I had sat in this same conference room on the 42nd floor, designing what we called the nuclear option, a compliance lock so secure that even we couldn't override it without proper authorization. Sophie had insisted on the failsafe after a near-breach attempt by a competitor who had tried to infiltrate our deal documentation through a phishing attack targeting junior staff Maya. She had said, her fingers dancing across the holographic display, if someone ever tries to steal our architectural work or bypass our team during a critical phase, this system will make sure they can't complete anything without the original architect's approval. Now sitting in my kitchen with my laptop open to the same system architecture, I realized Sophie had been more prescient than either of us knew. The compliance lock wasn't just protection against external threats, it was protection against internal betrayal. The gateway protocol was elegant in its complexity, 3 layers of verification, each dependent on the previous layer's completion. First, biometric confirmation from the senior architect. That's me. Second, synchronized legal approval from the acquiring firm's chief compliance officer. That's Liam Rosario at Marlin. Third, automated escrow release triggered only when both prior confirmations were complete and verified. But here's what Julian didn't know, and what Caleb certainly didn't understand. The biometric layer wasn't just a password or a fingerprint scan. It was a comprehensive authentication system that included voice pattern recognition, retinal scan, and behavioral keystroke analysis, all calibrated specifically to my physiological markers and recorded over months of regular system interaction. It wasn't designed to be transferable. It was designed to be absolutely unique. My phone buzzed with a text from Alina. Maya, Caleb's been in your office for 3 hours trying to access the gateway system. Brent from it came down twice and left looking confused. I smiled. Despite myself, Brent was competent but conservative. He would never attempt to override a system he didn't fully understand, especially one that generated error codes he couldn't trace to their source. What kind of error codes? I texted back. Authentication. Failure, invalid credentials. System lockout after multiple failed attempts. Alina replied, Julian's getting impatient? Of course he was. Julian had probably promised Marlon that the transition would be seamless, that Caleb was fully briefed and ready to execute, but promises didn't change biometric architecture, and Julian's confidence didn't alter the laws of digital security. I opened my secure admin portal and checked the system logs. Caleb had attempted gateway access 7 times in the past 4 hours, each attempt more aggressive than the last. The first few had been standard username-password combinations, probably using temporary credentials that Brent had issued. But the recent attempts showed signs of desperation. Multiple browser sessions, VPN routing attempts, even an effort to access the system through the mobile app. The logs told a story of mounting frustration and growing panic. Someone was realizing that systems couldn't simply be transferred through executive decree, that expertise wasn't inherited through DNA, even when the DNA was identical. My doorbell rang, interrupting my analysis through the peephole. I saw a familiar face, Elena, my former assistant, holding a small box and looking uncomfortable. Elena, I said, opening the door. What are you doing here? Maya, I'm so sorry, she said, stepping inside. Julian asked me to collect any remaining company materials from your home office, but honestly, I wanted to make sure you were okay. I took the box. From her hands, it contained my company laptop, tablet, and security badge items I'd been planning to return anyway. Thanks for bringing these personally. Maya, Elena's voice dropped to a whisper. What happened today, nobody understands. Julian just announced that Caleb was taking over, but Caleb doesn't know anything about the Marlon deal. He spent an hour asking me basic questions about the client team structure. Julian wants fresh optics. I repeated his words from earlier. Apparently, 8 years of relationship building isn't as valuable as the Knox family brand. Elena looked around my apartment, taking in the calm space that was so different from the corporate chaos we'd both known. But Maya, you built that deal? You know every detail, every legal requirement, every compliance specification. How can someone else just step in and finish it? They can't. I said simply, the system won't let them. She stared at me for a moment. Then her eyes widened with understanding. The gateway protocol. The biometric locks, you always said they were unhackable. They're not unhackable, I corrected. They're just locked to the person who designed them. The system recognizes the architect, not the title. Elena sat down heavily on my couch. Maya, what's going to happen when they can't complete the authorization? I had been asking myself the same question for the past 6 hours. The Marlon acquisition was scheduled to close in 36 hours. Liam Rosario would be expecting synchronized confirmation from Halden Knox's senior architect. But that architect was no longer employed by Halden Knox, and her replacement couldn't access the systems needed to provide that confirmation. The deal will stall. I said, Marlon will ask questions, Julian will make excuses, and eventually someone will realize they need me to complete what I started. And then what? Elena asked. I looked out my window toward the Manhattan skyline, where Halden Knox's building rose like a steel and glass monument to corporate ambition. Then we'll see how much fresh optics matter when the system demands substance. After Elena left, I returned to my laptop and pulled up Liam Rosario's contact information. We had developed a professional relationship built on mutual respect for detail and precision. Liam appreciated that I didn't cut corners. that I built systems with integrity rather than convenience. I drafted a careful email. Liam, hope your team is ready for tomorrow's final authorization. Just wanted to confirm that you'll be using the standard synchronized protocol for compliance verification. Let me know if you need any clarification on the gateway requirements. Best, Maya. It was a professional courtesy disguised as helpfulness, but really, it was a warning. Liam would know that the synchronized protocol required specific authorization from Julian Knox's senior architect, and when he couldn't reach that authorization, he would ask questions that Julian wasn't prepared to answer. My phone buzzed again. Alina. Maya, Caleb. Just left the building. Julian called an emergency meeting with Brent and the compliance team. They look worried. Any idea what they're discussing? I typed back. Brent mentioned something about system architecture and irreversible protocols, but they closed the conference room. Daughter pretty quickly. Irreversible protocols, that was accurate. The compliance lock had been designed with a specific philosophy: better to lose a deal than to compromise the integrity of the verification process. Sophie and I had built the system to prevent exactly what Julian had just attempted to do: replace expertise with politics. I closed my laptop and walked to my window. The city sparkled below, full of ambition and compromise, but also full of systems that worked according to their own logic, regardless of human desires. The traffic lights didn't care about executive privilege. The subway ran on schedules, not intentions. And somewhere in a server farm in New Jersey, the gateway protocol was waiting patiently for Maya Torres, senior deal architect, to complete the authorization sequence she had started. Julian had made a fundamental error. He had confused the person with the position, the name with the knowledge. And now he was discovering that some things couldn't be transferred through executive order. The system was still waiting, still blinking, still protecting the integrity of the deal. I had spent 18 months perfecting. And tomorrow, when Marlon expected final confirmation, the system would do exactly what it was designed to do: protect the truth. At 7:43 a.m., my phone exploded with notifications. The first was a LinkedIn message from Marcus Yoon, my former colleague who now worked at Meridian Capital. Maya, did you see the tech finance interview? Your replacement just went live on Bloomberg. The second was a text from Alina. Maya, you need to watch this now. I grabbed my laptop and pulled up the Bloomberg tech segment. There was Caleb Knox sitting in Julian Knox's executive conference room, the same room where I'd presented the Marlin feasibility study 18 months ago. He wore Julian's confident smile and Julian's navy suit. But something was fundamentally different about the way he occupied the space, like an actor who had memorized his lines but didn't understand the play. So Caleb, the interviewer Sarah Chen, was saying, "This is your first major acquisition as strategic lead. How does it feel to close a deal of this magnitude?" Sarah, it's incredibly exciting. Caleb leaned forward with practiced enthusiasm. The Marlon acquisition represents everything Julian Knox stands for: innovation, synergy, and forward-thinking leadership. Marlon, I felt my stomach drop. He had mispronounced the client's name on live television. The company we'd been working with for 18 months, the billion-dollar Swiss conglomerate whose executives had flown to New York 6 times for meetings, was now Marlon, in Caleb's confident but clueless delivery. "Tell us about the integration process," Sarah continued. "What makes this deal unique in the current market?" Caleb's smile never wavered. "Well, Sarah, we've developed a proprietary compliance framework that leverages blockchain technology for seamless data sovereignty transitions. The regulatory architecture utilizes advanced cryptographic protocols to ensure full transparency while maintaining security standards. Blockchain technology." I closed my eyes in horror. The Marlon deal had nothing to do with blockchain technology. In fact, Marlon's CTO had specifically rejected blockchain proposals during our February meeting, citing security concerns and regulatory complexity. But Caleb was spinning corporate buzzwords with the confidence of someone who believed his own marketing copy. "Fascinating," Sarah said. "And how does this align with Marlon's existing infrastructure?" Marlin has been incredibly forward-thinking in their approach to digital transformation, Caleb continued. Their leadership team, particularly their chief innovation officer, understood immediately that our solution would revolutionize their procurement architecture. Chief Innovation Officer Marlin didn't have a chief innovation officer. Their leadership team consisted of a CEO, CTO, and CFO with traditional European corporate structure. But Caleb was improvising confidently, creating job titles and strategic visions that existed only in his imagination. The interview continued for another 8 minutes. Caleb managed to mispronounce Marlin 3 more times, referred to their Zurich headquarters as their Geneva headquarters, and claimed that the deal had been in development for 2 years instead of 18 months by the time the segment ended. I was watching a masterclass in confident incompetence. My phone rang immediately. Sophie Nguyen's voice was tight with controlled anger. "Maya, please tell me you're watching this disaster." "I'm watching it," I said. "But I'm not sure. I'm believing it." He called it Marlon Maya. Marlon like it's some kind of blockchain startup. He has no idea what he's talking about. "Sophie, he just told Bloomberg that Marlin has a chief innovation officer and that our deal involves blockchain technology for data sovereignty transitions." Jesus. Sophie was quiet for a moment. "Maya, what happens when Marlin sees this?" "Liam Rosario sees everything," I said. "He monitors all media coverage related to their acquisitions. He's probably already got alerts set up for Julian Knox and Marlin mentions. And when he sees that Caleb doesn't know the client's name, he's going to have questions that Julian can't answer." Within an hour, the Bloomberg clip was circulating on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Reddit tech finance forums were dissecting Caleb's performance with the enthusiasm of vultures spotting roadkill. The comments ranged from confused to incredulous. One particularly popular post read, "Did this guy just call Marlin Systems Marlon? Did he just claim a Swiss manufacturing company is doing blockchain data sovereignty transitions? Someone check this man's pulse." But it was the notification from Marlin that made my stomach drop. An email forwarded from Elena, who still had access to my former company account. Subject line, "Urgent clarification needed, sender. Liam Rosario, Chief Compliance Officer, Marlin Systems Maya. I hope this message reaches you. We've been reviewing media coverage of tomorrow's closing and have some concerns about statements made by your colleague Caleb Knox. Could you please confirm the accuracy of his characterization of our agreement, particularly regarding blockchain integration and data sovereignty protocols? We want to ensure full alignment." Before final authorization, Best Liam was being diplomatic, but I could read between the lines he had watched the Bloomberg interview and realized that either Julian Knox had fundamentally misunderstood the deal they'd been negotiating for 18 months, or the person representing the deal had no idea what he was talking about. I forwarded the email to my personal account, then crafted a careful response. "Liam, I'm no longer the lead contact for this transaction. Julian Knox can address any questions about current representation. However, I can confirm that our original agreement contains no blockchain components and focuses primarily on traditional compliance architecture, as discussed in our previous meetings. Best Maya." Professional, diplomatic, and completely unhelpful, Liam would now know that something had changed in Julian Knox's representation, but he wouldn't know exactly what, and Julian would have to explain why the deal's original architect was no longer involved, and why her replacement had publicly mischaracterized the entire agreement. My phone buzzed with a text from Elena. "Maya, Julian just called an emergency meeting with the entire compliance team. Brent looks like he's going to throw up. Any word on what they're discussing?" I replied, "Caleb keeps saying the interview went well, but Julian's been on the phone with someone for the past hour and he sounds panicked." Elena texted back, "Also, Liam Rosario from Marlin called the main office asking to speak with you specifically." Of course he did. Liam was a professional. He had worked with me directly on the compliance architecture, and now he was watching someone else claim credit for work that clearly wasn't theirs, while simultaneously demonstrating complete ignorance of the actual agreement. What did they tell him? I asked. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. That you were no longer with the company, Alina replied. He seemed surprised. Surprised was an understatement Liam had been expecting to work. With me on the final authorization tomorrow, he had been counting on the relationship we'd built over 18 months of detailed negotiations, and now he was discovering that his primary contact had been replaced by someone who didn't know the client's name. I opened my laptop and checked the system logs. The gateway protocol showed 11 more failed access attempts. Since the Bloomberg interview, Caleb was clearly panicking, trying every possible combination of credentials to unlock the compliance architecture that only I could access. But here's what Julian and Caleb still didn't understand. The system wasn't just protected by passwords or security questions. It was protected by design, by architecture that recognized the difference. Between authority and authenticity, my doorbell rang. Sophie stood outside holding 2 cups of coffee and a tablet loaded with social media coverage. "Maya, we need to talk." "Come in," I said, though I think we both know what you're going to say. Sophie sat down and pulled up the Reddit thread about Caleb's interview. "Maya, this is beyond embarrassing. This is professional malpractice. He just told the entire tech finance world that Marlin Systems is doing blockchain data, sovereignty transitions." "I know," I said, "and Liam Rosario just emailed asking for clarification." Sophie's eyes widened. "He emailed you directly?" "He emailed the company asking for me specifically, but they told him I was no longer available." "Maya." Sophie leaned forward. "Do you realize what's about to happen when Marlin discovers that their billion-dollar acquisition is being handled by someone who doesn't understand the basic terms of the agreement?" I looked out my window toward the Julian Knox building where Julian was probably having emergency meetings and Caleb was probably still trying to access systems that would never recognize his authority. "I think we're about to find out." The system was still waiting, still protecting the integrity of the work I had built, still demanding that competence matter more than connections. And tomorrow, when the deal was supposed to close, the system would do exactly what Sophie and I had designed it to do: protect the truth from confident incompetence. At 6:23 a.m., 24 hours before the scheduled closing, Liam Rosario sent an email that changed everything. Subject line: formal transaction review required. Recipient Julian Knox, CEO. Julian Knox, with CCs to Marlin's entire legal team, board of directors, and somehow me, Maya Torres. While I understand you are no longer officially representing this transaction, Marlin Systems is formally requesting a comprehensive technical audit of all compliance documentation before proceeding with final authorization. Our legal team has identified several discrepancies between public statements made by your current representative and the architectural specifications we have been reviewing for 18 months. We require immediate clarification on the following points. 1. Blockchain integration protocols mentioned in yesterday's media interview versus the traditional compliance framework documented in our agreement. 2. Data sovereignty transition mechanisms described by Mr. Caleb Knox versus the algorithmic transparency requirements we negotiated with Ms. Torres. 3. The apparent replacement of senior personnel without notification to the acquiring party as required by Section 12. 4. Of our preliminary agreement until these discrepancies are resolved. Marlin Systems cannot proceed with final authorization. Best regards, Liam Rosario, Chief Compliance Officer, Marlin Systems. I read the email 3 times sitting in my kitchen with morning coffee, realizing that Liam had just dropped a regulatory bomb that would detonate Julian's carefully constructed narrative. The email wasn't just a request for clarification. It was a formal audit demand from a billion-dollar client who had discovered that their acquiring partner either didn't understand their own deal or had fundamentally misrepresented it. My phone rang immediately. Julian's number. "Maya, we need to talk." "Good morning, Julian," I said calmly. "I assume you received Liam's email." "Maya, this is a misunderstanding. Caleb's interview was meant to generate excitement about the deal. He was speaking in broad strategic terms, not technical specifics. Broad. Strategic terms. Julian was trying to spin Caleb's mispronunciation of the client's name and fabrication of blockchain frameworks as marketing enthusiasm. Julian Caleb told Bloomberg that Marlin has a chief innovation officer and that our deal involves cryptographic protocols for data sovereignty. Transitions, none of that exists. Maya, listen. Julian's voice carried a strain I'd never heard before. We can resolve this quickly if you just provide Caleb with the gateway access codes. The system lockout is creating unnecessary complications. Unnecessary complications. The system lockout was functioning exactly as designed, preventing unauthorized access to compliance architecture that Caleb couldn't understand, let alone operate. Julian, the gateway protocols don't use access codes. They use biometric authentication, calibrated specifically to the system architect. Then transfer the authentication, Maya. This is bigger than individual preferences. This is about the company's future. Transfer the authentication. Julian still didn't comprehend that the system wasn't a preference. It was a security framework designed to prevent exactly what he was attempting. Julian, even if I wanted to transfer authentication, which don't the system architecture doesn't permit it? The biometric locks are hard-coded to specific physiological markers. Silence on Julian's end. Then, Maya Marlin is threatening to terminate the acquisition. Julian Marlin is demanding honesty about who they're actually working with and what they're actually buying. Caleb's Bloomberg interview made it clear he doesn't know either. Maya. Julian's voice dropped to something approaching desperation. What do you want, money equity partnership? Whatever it takes to resolve this. What do you want, the question revealed? Everything. Julian still believed this was a negotiation, that my competence was a commodity he could purchase when convenient and discard when inconvenient. Julian, I don't want anything from you. I want you to explain to Liam Rosario why you replaced the deal architect 48 hours before closing without notifying the client. Maya, please. Julian, I'm no longer your employee. This is your problem to solve. After ending the call, I forwarded Liam's email to Sophie with a brief message. Thought you'd appreciate seeing this. Her response was immediate. Maya, this is beautiful. Liam just exposed every lie Julian has been telling the board, Marlin's legal team. And probably the SEC are going to want answers. The CC, that was a complication. Julian hadn't anticipated public companies couldn't simply replace senior personnel on billion-dollar acquisitions without disclosure requirements, but Julian had been so focused on Knox family optics that he'd ignored regulatory obligations. My phone buzzed with a text from Alina. Maya, the office is in complete chaos. Julian called an emergency board meeting. Brent is printing every email exchange from the past year, and Caleb locked himself in the conference room. What's Caleb doing in the conference room? I replied. Nobody knows, but people can hear him making phone calls and occasionally shouting at someone about system access. Brent tried to explain that the authentication protocols can't be overridden, but Caleb insisted there must be a manual bypass. Manual bypass. Caleb still believed that technology was negotiable, that security protocols could be circumvented through persistence and confidence, but the gateway system operated according to mathematical principles, not social dynamics. Another text from Alina. Maya, Julian just asked Brent if they could hire external hackers to break into your system. External hackers, I almost laughed. Julian was so desperate to avoid admitting his mistake that he was considering criminal activity. Brent would never approve such an approach, and any external security firm would recognize immediately that the system was functioning correctly. My doorbell chimed. Miriam Hale, my personal legal advisor, stood outside holding a briefcase and wearing the expression of someone who had received interesting news. Maya, we should discuss your legal position. Come in, Miriam. What's your assessment? Miriam settled into my living room and opened her briefcase. Maya, I've been reviewing your original employment agreement and the intellectual property clauses regarding system architecture. You may have more leverage than you realize. What kind of leverage? Maya, you own the gateway protocol, not Julian Knox. When you designed the compliance architecture, you filed it as personal intellectual property licensed to the company for specific use. The biometric authentication isn't just security, it's ownership verification. I stared at Miriam, processing the implications. So when Julian fired me, he terminated Julian Knox's license to use your proprietary system. Miriam finished. Technically, Caleb isn't just unable to access the gateway. He's legally prohibited from using it without your explicit permission. My phone rang. Liam Rosario's number. Maya, I hope you don't mind me calling directly. Not at all. Liam, what can I help you with? Maya, I've been reviewing our correspondence from the past 18 months, and I want to confirm something. You personally designed the compliance framework that Marlon has been evaluating, correct? That's correct. Liam, I architected the entire regulatory structure specifically for Marlon's requirements. Maya, our legal team has a question about continuity. If the system architect is no longer involved in the transaction, how can Marlon verify that the final implementation matches the specifications we approved? How can Marlon verify? That was the question that would unravel Julian's entire strategy. Liam was diplomatically asking whether Caleb could actually deliver what I had promised. Liam, that's an excellent question that you should direct to Julian Knox. Maya, I'm going to be direct with you. Marlon's board is uncomfortable proceeding with someone who clearly doesn't understand the technical details of our agreement. Yesterday's interview raised serious concerns about Julian Knox's internal communication and project management. Internal communication and project management. Liam was being polite, but he was describing a company that had replaced competence with politics and expertise with ego. Liam, I understand your concerns completely. Maya, if you were still involved in this transaction, would you be confident in the final implementation? If I were still involved? Liam was asking whether the deal could actually be completed successfully with proper oversight. Liam, if I were still involved, the system would function exactly as designed. Maya, Marlon would like to extend a formal invitation for you to join tomorrow's final authorization conference as an independent technical consultant. We're willing to compensate you directly for verification services. Marlon wanted to hire me directly to complete the deal that Julian had fired me from, to provide the expertise that Caleb couldn't deliver. Liam, that's an interesting proposal. Let me consider it and respond this afternoon, after ending the call. I realized that Liam had just offered me a solution that would humiliate Julian while protecting Marlon's interests. If I accepted Marlon's consulting offer, I would be completing my own deal. While Julian and Caleb watched helplessly from the sidelines, Miriam smiled knowingly. Maya, that phone call just gave you complete control over this situation. My phone exploded with messages from Alina. Maya, Julian is losing his mind. He just screamed at Brent that they need to find a way to clone your voice for the biometric system. Brent told him that would be identity fraud, and Julian said he didn't care. Identity fraud? Julian was now considering felony charges to avoid admitting he had made a mistake. But even if he found someone willing to attempt voice cloning, the system included retinal scanning, keystroke analysis, and behavioral pattern recognition that would be impossible to replicate. Another message from Alina. Maya, Caleb just emerged from the conference room and announced that he's going to fix this by calling Liam Rosario directly to explain the misunderstanding. Caleb was going to call Liam directly. The man who had mispronounced Marlon's name 4 times on television was going to personally contact their chief compliance officer to clarify technical details. He didn't understand. This would be entertaining. Maya. Another text from Alina. Caleb is on speakerphone with Liam Rosario in Julian's office. Everyone can hear the conversation. I wished I could observe that conversation. Caleb attempting to explain blockchain frameworks that didn't exist to Liam Rosario, who had spent 18 months reviewing actual compliance documentation. My phone rang. Alina's number. Maya, you need to hear this. Caleb just told Liam that the Bloomberg interview was performance art to generate market excitement. and that the real technical specifications are proprietary intellectual property that can't be discussed publicly. Performance art. Caleb was now claiming that his complete ignorance of the deal was intentional misdirection designed to protect trade secrets. Alina, what did Liam say? Liam asked Caleb to explain the algorithmic transparency protocols for procurement automation, and Caleb said those details were above his classification level. Above his classification level, Caleb had just admitted to Marlin's chief compliance officer that he didn't have security clearance to understand the deal he was supposed to be completing. Maya, it gets worse. Caleb just asked Liam if Marlin could provide technical documentation to help him understand the compliance requirements. Liam said that Marlin had been working with those specifications for 18 months, and that Caleb should already have access to them. Caleb had just asked the client to explain their own deal to him, revealing that he possessed zero knowledge of 18 months of negotiations and architectural development. Maya. Alina's voice carried barely controlled amazement. Liam just asked to speak with you directly, and Caleb said you were unavailable, due to a non-disclosure agreement. Non-disclosure agreement. Caleb was improvising explanations that made progressively less sense, while Liam Rosario documented every word for Marlin's legal team. The system was still waiting, still protecting the integrity of the work I had built, still demanding that competence matter more than connections. And now Marlin's legal team was demanding the same thing. Julian's plan was collapsing under the weight of its own deception. And tomorrow, when the deal was supposed to close, the system would do exactly what it was designed to accomplish: expose the truth, regardless of how desperately Julian tried to hide it. At 2:17 p.m., Julian sent a formal meeting request through Miriam Hale's office subject line: settlement discussion regarding ongoing transaction location. Miriam's conference room time, 4 p.m. today. Attendees: Julian Knox, Caleb Knox, Maya Torres, and legal counsel. Miriam forwarded the request with her own assessment. Maya, this is Julian's. Surrender. He's finally realized he needs you more than you need him. The location choice is significant. He's coming to neutral territory, which means he's acknowledging he has no leverage. I had been expecting this moment since Caleb's Bloomberg disaster. Julian had exhausted every alternative option. External hackers had refused to attempt system penetration. Citing legal liability, Caleb's phone call with Liam had eliminated any remaining credibility, and Marlin's board was now formally questioning Halden Knox's competence to complete the transaction. Maya, Miriam continued, before this meeting, I want to review your negotiating position. You own the intellectual property. Julian needs your system functions correctly. Caleb cannot access it, and Marlin won't proceed without your involvement. You hold all the cards. All the cards that was accurate, but the question was how to play them. Julian would arrive desperate but still hoping to manipulate me into saving his reputation, while preserving his narrative that Caleb was qualified to lead the deal. At exactly 4 p.m., Julian and Caleb entered Miriam's conference room. Julian looked like he hadn't slept, his usually perfect hair slightly disheveled, his signature navy suit. Wrinkled Caleb appeared even worse, hollow-eyed and visibly shaking, probably from caffeine overdose and mounting panic. Maya, Julian began without preamble, we need to resolve this situation quickly. Marlin is demanding answers that only you can provide. Julian, I replied calmly, Marlin is demanding competence that only I can deliver. There's a difference. Caleb leaned forward aggressively. Maya, we understand you're upset about the transition, but this is bigger than personal feelings. This is about the company's future. Personal feelings. Caleb still believed that my objection was emotional rather than professional, that I was sulking about losing my position rather than protecting 18 months of architectural work. Caleb, this isn't about personal feelings. This is about professional competence. You've demonstrated publicly that you don't understand the deal you're supposed to be completing. Maya, Julian interrupted. We're prepared to offer you a consulting contract. significant compensation and public recognition for your contribution to the deal's success. Significant compensation and public recognition Julian was offering to pay me to fix the problem he had created while allowing him to claim credit for the solution. Julian, what specific consulting responsibilities are you proposing? Technical oversight of the final authorization process, Julian said carefully, working with Caleb to ensure smooth completion. Working with Caleb. Julian still wanted to maintain the fiction that Caleb was leading the deal while I provided behind-the-scenes support. Julian, I'm not interested in being Caleb's technical support. Maya, be reasonable, Caleb said, his voice rising. I have strategic vision, you have operational knowledge. Together we can complete this deal successfully. Strategic vision. Caleb's strategic vision had produced a Bloomberg interview that nearly terminated, a billion-dollar acquisition, and a phone call with Liam Rosario that eliminated his remaining credibility. Caleb, your strategic vision mispronounced the client's name 4 times. Miriam intervened smoothly. Gentlemen, let's discuss the actual terms. Maya has received a direct offer from Marlin Systems to serve as independent technical consultant for the final authorization. Julian's face went pale. Marlin contacted you directly? Liam Rosario called yesterday. I confirmed. Marlin wants to hire me to complete the compliance verification because they've lost confidence in Halden Knox's ability to deliver. Maya, you can't work for Marlin, Caleb said desperately. That's a conflict of interest. Caleb, I no longer work for Halden. Knox, there's no conflict of interest, I replied. And Marlin needs someone who actually understands the deal they're purchasing. Julian was quiet for several seconds, calculating the implications. If I accepted Marlin's offer, I would complete the deal as their consultant. While Halden Knox watched helplessly, Julian would lose control of the narrative, and Caleb would be exposed as completely irrelevant. Maya, what would it take for you to work with us instead of against us? Julian asked. Finally, work with us instead of against us. Julian was framing this as a loyalty test rather than a competence issue. Julian, I'm not working against you, I'm protecting the integrity of the system. I designed the fact that your replacement can't operate, it isn't my problem. Maya, Caleb tried a different approach. If you help us complete this deal successfully, I'll ensure you receive full credit for the architectural work. Your name will be on all the documentation. Full credit for the architectural work. Caleb was offering to give me credit for work that was already mine, that I had already completed before he was involved. Caleb, my name is already on the documentation, I wrote it. Miriam smiled slightly and opened her briefcase. Gentlemen, we should clarify something important. Maya owns the intellectual property for the Gateway Protocol. She licensed it to Halden Knox for specific use. When you terminated her employment, you voided that license. Julian stared at Miriam, then at me. What does that mean exactly? It means, Miriam continued, that Caleb doesn't just lack access to the system, he's legally prohibited from using it without Maya's explicit permission. Attempting to bypass or circumvent her intellectual property would constitute theft. Caleb's face went from pale to gray. Maya, you can't own company systems. I developed those protocols while employed by Halden Knox. Caleb, I said patiently, you've been employed by Halden Knox for 3 days. You didn't develop anything. You can't even pronounce the client's name correctly. Maya. Julian's voice carried a note of genuine desperation. What do you want to make this work? Money, partnership, percentage of the deal, equity in the company? Just, tell me what it takes. What do you want? Julian was still trying to purchase a solution to a problem that couldn't be solved with money or equity. The issue wasn't compensation. It was competence. Julian, I want you to admit that you made a mistake. What kind of mistake? Julian asked carefully. You replaced the deal architect 48 hours before closing without understanding the technical requirements. You assumed expertise could be transferred through executive decree, and you prioritized family connections over professional competence. Julian was quiet for a long moment, then, Maya, if I acknowledge that the transition was premature, will you help us complete the deal? Julian, acknowledging that the transition was premature isn't the same as admitting it was wrong, I replied. And helping you complete the deal would require undoing the transition entirely. Maya, what does that mean specifically? Caleb asked. It means, Caleb, that you would step aside and I would resume responsibility for the final authorization as the original deal architect. Caleb's confident facade finally cracked completely. Maya, I can't just step aside. This is my opportunity to prove myself to establish my reputation in enterprise transactions. Caleb, your Bloomberg interview already established your reputation, I said, and your phone call with Liam Rosario confirmed it. You've proven that you're not qualified for this responsibility. Maya. Julian tried one more approach. What if we restructure this as a partnership, you and Caleb co-leading? The final phase sharing credit and responsibility, co-leading with Caleb sharing responsibility for 18 months of work with someone who had contributed nothing but public embarrassment. Julian, there's no partnership possible here. Caleb doesn't understand the technical architecture, the client relationships, or the regulatory requirements. He would be a liability, not an asset. Miriam checked her watch. Gentlemen, Maya has until 6 p.m. to respond to Marlon's consulting offer if you want. To propose alternative arrangements, you have approximately 90 minutes. Julian and Caleb exchanged glances. Caleb looked like he might be physically ill. Julian looked like a man watching his carefully constructed world collapse in real time. Maya, Julian said finally, if we agree to your terms, full restoration of your position, complete authority over the final authorization, what guarantee do we have that you'll actually complete the deal? Julian, I replied, you have the same guarantee you had for 18 months before you fired me, my professional competence and commitment to doing the work correctly. And if we don't agree to your terms, Caleb asked weakly, then I accept Marlon's offer and complete the deal as their consultant. While you explain to your board why Julian Knox lost control of their largest transaction. Julian stood up slowly. Caleb remained seated, looking defeated. Maya, we need time to consider this. You have 90 minutes, Miriam said. After that, Maya's options changed significantly. After they left, Miriam turned to me with satisfaction. Maya, that was perfect. You gave them exactly one option. Surrender completely or lose everything. My phone buzzed with a text from Alina. Maya, the board just called. An emergency meeting. Julian and Caleb are back in the building, and Julian looks like he's going to throw up. The board meeting. Julian would have to explain to Julian Knox's directors why their billion-dollar acquisition was being completed by an employee he had fired, why their chosen replacement had humiliated the company on television, and why their client was now questioning their competence. The system was still waiting, still protecting the integrity of the work I had built, still demanding that competence matter more than connections, and now Julian's own board was demanding the same thing in 90 minutes. Julian would have to choose between his ego and his company's future, and the system would ensure he made that choice. Based on truth rather than politics, at 5:47 p.m., 13 minutes before my deadline to respond to Marlon's consulting offer, Alina sent me a screenshot that changed everything. Subject line, you're going to want to see this immediately. The image showed a Slack conversation from Julian Knox's internal compliance channel. Participants Brent Kowalski, Head of Information Technology, Sarah Martinez, Senior Compliance Analyst, and David Chen Jr., Systems Administrator. Timestamp 3:22 p.m. today. Approximately 2 hours after my meeting with Julian. Brent. Emergency situation with Marlon Deal Gateway System completely locked to Maya Torres's biometric profile. Sarah. What do you mean locked? Brent. Voice recognition retinal scan. Keystroke patterns all calibrated to her specific physiological markers. Caleb can't access anything. David. Can we reset the authentication protocols? Brent. Negative. The system was designed to prevent exactly that kind of override. Maya built it specifically to stop unauthorized access during critical deal phases. Sarah. So what you're saying is Maya is the only person who can complete the authorization. Brent. That's exactly what I'm saying. and she doesn't work here anymore. David, holy shit. So Julian fired the only person who can actually close the deal, Brent. Pretty much, yeah. And Caleb has no idea how any of it works. He spent 4 hours trying to guess passwords. Sarah, this is insane. How did Julian not know about the biometric locks? Brent, Maya tried to explain it, but Julian kept interrupting, saying systems could be transferred. David, transferred? How do you transfer a retinal scan? Brent, you don't, which is why we're fucked unless Maya agrees to help us. Sarah, Maya, who Julian fired without cause, 48 hours before the biggest deal in company history. Brent, that would be the Maya. Yes. The conversation continued for another dozen exchanges. Brent explaining the technical impossibility of bypassing my security architecture. Sarah expressing disbelief that Julian had fired me without understanding the system dependencies, and David documenting every failed attempt Caleb had made to access the gateway protocol. But the screenshot that made my pulse accelerate was the final exchange in the thread. Sarah, so if Maya doesn't help us, the deal dies. Brent, worse than that, Marlon is already asking questions about continuity and competence. If this gets out publicly, it will destroy our reputation in enterprise acquisitions. David, it's going to get out. Sarah Bloomberg already aired Caleb's disaster interview, and tech finance reporters are asking why Maya was replaced. Brent, Julian is meeting with Maya right now, trying to convince her to save the deal. Sarah, after he fired her. Brent, after he fired her and replaced her with his twin brother who doesn't know what Marlin Systems actually does. David, this company is run by idiots. The Slack thread had been active for over 2 hours, which meant dozens of Halden Knox employees now knew that Julian had created an unsolvable crisis, that the billion-dollar Marlin acquisition depended entirely on my cooperation, and that Caleb was completely unqualified for the responsibility he'd been given. My phone rang immediately. Sophie Nagayan's number, Maya. Please tell me you've seen the Slack leak. Just saw it, I confirmed. How did you get access to internal Halden Knox channels? Maya, I still have friends in the compliance department. Sarah Martinez forwarded it to me, along with a message that said, thought you should know Maya has all the power now. All the power that was accurate. The Slack conversation had documented everything: Julian's mistake, Caleb's incompetence, Brent's technical assessment, and the company's complete dependence on my expertise. Sophie, this conversation is going to leak beyond Halden Knox. I said, Sarah's right about reputation damage once this gets to tech finance reporters. Julian's going to have bigger problems than the Marlin deal. Maya, it gets better. Sarah also forwarded me email exchanges between Julian and the board. Apparently, they're demanding explanations for why the deal architect was replaced without notification, and why the replacement is publicly misrepresenting transaction details. The board was asking questions Julian couldn't answer without admitting he had prioritized family connections over professional competence, that he had fired me without understanding the technical consequences, and that he had nearly destroyed a billion-dollar acquisition to give Caleb an unearned opportunity. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus Yoon. Maya, I just received the most interesting phone call from a reporter at Tech Finance Weekly. They're working on a story about corporate governance failures and enterprise acquisitions, and they asked specifically about your situation at Halden Knox. Reporters were now investigating the story independently. Julian's attempt to quietly replace me had become a case study in executive incompetence and corporate dysfunction. Another text from Marcus Maya. This reporter has sources inside Halden Knox who are providing documentation about the biometric security locks and Caleb's failed access attempts. The story is going to expose everything. Documentation about the biometric security locks. Someone inside Halden Knox was actively leaking information to journalists. Possibly Sarah Martinez, possibly Brent, possibly David Chen, or maybe all three, the employees who had watched Julian's decision to destroy their company's credibility were now ensuring the truth reached the public. My doorbell chimed. Miriam Hale stood outside, holding her phone and wearing an expression of barely contained excitement. Maya, you need to see. This immediately? Miriam, what's happening? Maya Tech Finance Weekly just published a preliminary article titled How Family Connections Nearly Destroyed a Billion-Dollar Acquisition. It includes quotes from unnamed sources inside Halden Knox, describing Julian's decision to replace you with his unqualified twin brother. Tech Finance Weekly had published the story the Slack leak had provided journalists with enough information to document Julian's incompetence and Caleb's failures. The article would be circulating through financial media within hours. Miriam showed me her phone screen. The article's opening paragraph read, Sources inside Halden Knox reveal that CEO Julian Knox replaced the lead architect of a $1.8 billion acquisition with his twin brother Caleb Knox just 48 hours before closing. Despite Caleb's complete lack of experience in enterprise compliance and regulatory architecture, the decision has reportedly locked the company out of its own transaction completion systems. The journalist had understood the technical implications immediately. Julian hadn't just replaced me, he had rendered the deal impossible to complete. Maya. Miriam continued. The article quotes multiple Halden Knox employees confirming that you own the intellectual property for the compliance system, and that Caleb cannot access it legally or technically. Multiple Halden Knox employees. The leaks were coordinated and comprehensive. Sarah Brent David, and probably others were providing journalists with documentation evidence and technical explanations that would expose every aspect of Julian's failure. My phone rang Julian's number again. His voice carried panic and exhaustion. Maya, the board is demanding answers. I need to know immediately whether you'll help us complete the deal. Julian, have you seen the Tech Finance Weekly article? Silence. Then, what article? The article titled, How Family Connections Nearly Destroyed a Billion-Dollar Acquisition. It includes quotes from your own employees explaining why Caleb can't access my system. Maya, who leaked that information. Julian, based on the detail and accuracy, I'd guess most of your compliance team Brent from it and probably several board members. The question isn't who leaked it. The question is why you gave them something worth leaking. Maya, this is sabotage by disgruntled employees. Julian, this is documentation by competent employees who watched you make a catastrophic decision and decided the truth should be public. Maya, if you don't help us, the board is going to terminate me. Julian, if I do help you, the board should still terminate you for making this decision in the first place. Maya, please. Julian, I already told you my terms: complete restoration of my position, full authority over the final authorization, and public acknowledgement that the transition was a mistake. Maya, the board will never approve public acknowledgement of mistakes. It would expose us to shareholder lawsuits. Julian, the Tech Finance Weekly article already exposed you to shareholder lawsuits. My acknowledgement would just confirm what your own employees are telling reporters. Julian was quiet for a long moment. Then, Maya, if I agree to your terms privately, will you complete the deal? Julian, there's nothing private about this anymore. The story is public. Your employees are talking to journalists, and Marlan's board is questioning your competence. Either you restore my position publicly, or I accept Marlan's consulting offer publicly. Maya, you're destroying my career. Julian, you destroyed your own career when you fired me without understanding the consequences. I'm just refusing to save you from them. After ending the call, I realized that the Slack leak had accomplished something I couldn't have achieved alone. It had created a public record of Julian's incompetence that would survive regardless of how the Marlan deal was resolved. The system was still waiting, still protecting the integrity of the work I had built, still demanding that competence matter more than connections. And now the entire financial media was demanding the same thing. Julian's reputation was collapsing under the weight of documented evidence, and tomorrow, when the deal was supposed to close, the system would ensure that truth mattered more than family connections. At 8:15 a.m., the final day, Liam Rosario sent the email that ended everything, subject line, "Formal transaction termination notice, recipient Julian Knox," with copies to Marlin's board, SEC filing requirements, and financial media. Julian, we have reviewed yesterday's developments, including leaked internal communications, public statements by your representative, and technical assessments from our legal team. Marlin Systems cannot proceed with this acquisition. Under current circumstances, the replacement of senior personnel without notification combined with demonstrated incompetence in transaction management constitutes material breach of our preliminary agreement. Effective immediately, Marlin is withdrawing from all negotiations and terminating this transaction. I read the email while drinking coffee in my kitchen, realizing that Liam had just saved me from making an impossible choice. Marlin had terminated the deal before I could accept or decline their consulting offer. My phone exploded with notifications. Julian calling repeatedly, text messages from Alina, describing chaos at Halden Knox LinkedIn, updates about Marlin's withdrawal, and news alerts about the collapsed acquisition. When I finally answered Julian's call, his voice was barely recognizable. "Maya, they killed the deal. Marlin terminated everything." "Julian, they didn't kill the deal. You killed the deal when you replaced competence with ego." "Maya, this is disaster. The board is meeting in an hour. Our stock is going to collapse. Shareholders are going to sue everyone." The board meeting. Julian would finally face consequences for prioritizing family connections over professional expertise, for assuming systems could be transferred through executive decree, and for nearly destroying a billion-dollar acquisition to give Caleb an unearned opportunity. Marcus Yoon called while I was reading coverage of Halden Knox's collapse. "Maya, we should discuss your future. Meridian has a partnership offer that might interest you." Meridian. Strategic Partners. Marcus's firm specialized in enterprise compliance architecture. Exactly the work I'd been doing at Halden Knox, but with leadership that understood the difference between competence and connections. "Marcus, what kind of partnership?" "Full partner Maya equity compensation, your own team, complete autonomy over compliance architecture, and the first project would be designing transaction security for a $2 billion acquisition, $2 billion larger than the Marlin deal that Julian had destroyed, and this time I would control every aspect of the architecture from initial design to final implementation." "Maya, there's something else," Marcus continued. "3 Halden Knox board members called me yesterday asking about your availability. They're apparently planning to remove Julian and want to offer you the CEO position." The CEO position, Julian's job offered to the woman he had fired 48 hours before the biggest deal in company history. There was poetic justice in that possibility, but also the question of whether Halden Knox could recover from the reputational damage Julian had caused. "Marcus, the Halden Knox offer is interesting, but what's the long-term stability there?" "Honestly, Maya, probably minimal. The Marlin collapse is going to trigger regulatory investigations, shareholder lawsuits, and client defections. The company might not survive Julian's incompetence. Might not survive." That was accurate. Halden Knox's reputation in enterprise acquisitions was built on competence and reliability. Julian had demonstrated neither, and the financial media was documenting every failure. The Meridian offer gives you a fresh start. Maya, no corporate politics, no family dynasties, just expertise and results. By noon, the financial media had documented every aspect of Halden Knox's collapse. Bloomberg published a detailed timeline of Julian's decisions. Tech Finance Weekly interviewed former employees about the biometric security. Locks and the Wall Street Journal ran an editorial titled, "When Ego Destroys Billions." At 2:30 p.m., Halden Knox's board issued a press release. Effective immediately, Julian Knox has resigned as Chief Executive Officer. The board is conducting a comprehensive review of recent transaction management failures and will announce new leadership shortly. Julian Knox has resigned. The man who had fired me 48 hours before the deal closed had been forced out by his own board of directors, who finally understood that family connections couldn't substitute for professional competence. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophie. Julian's resignation press release specifically mentions failures in personnel management and technical oversight. They're basically admitting you were right. Failures in personnel management and technical oversight. The board was documenting Julian's mistakes without naming me directly, but everyone in the industry would understand that personnel management meant firing the deal architect and technical oversight meant replacing expertise with ego. Another text from Alina. Caleb just cleaned out his office security, escorted him to the parking garage. He looked completely defeated. Caleb, escorted out by security, the man who had thought blockchain experience qualified him for enterprise compliance, was discovering that confidence couldn't substitute for competence. That genetic similarity to the CEO didn't guarantee professional capability. Alina continued, Brent asked me to tell you that the gateway system is still running, still waiting for your authorization. He said it's the most secure system he's ever seen. Still waiting for my authorization. The system I had designed was functioning exactly as intended, protecting the integrity of the work even after the company had collapsed around it. The system had won. Competence had triumphed over connections. Truth had survived corporate politics. And now I had to decide whether to rebuild Halden Knox or start fresh at Meridian. Either way, the mirror deal was finally over. 3 weeks later, I sat in my new corner office at Meridian Strategic Partners. No nameplate on the door, no corporate hierarchy, just clean lines, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a different part of Manhattan. The space felt like possibility rather than politics. My laptop chimed with a notification, "Welcome Torres partner," from the internal messaging system Alina had joined. As my first hire, her systems analysis expertise perfectly complementing my architectural work together, we were designing compliance frameworks that prioritized integrity over optics. Alina said, looking up from her workstation. Tech Finance. Weekly wants to interview you about the Halden Knox collapse. They're calling it a case study in corporate governance failure. Decline the interview, I replied. But send them our new paper on biometric security protocols in enterprise transactions. Let the work speak for itself. My phone buzzed with a text from Liam Rosario. Marlin is considering a new acquisition partner. Meridian's reputation for technical excellence is exactly what we need. Interested in designing our next compliance framework. Interested indeed. Liam wanted to work with someone who understood that systems matter more than surnames, that expertise couldn't be inherited through genetics, and that the best security came from people who built it with integrity. The cursor blinked on my screen, waiting patiently for my next design. Just like the gateway protocol had waited for Torres. But this time, I wasn't protecting work from corporate politics. I was building something better. Competence had won connections, had failed, and the mirror finally reflected truth. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.